I've directed 40 films and produced another 20 films, and then on top of that, an author of books, and I'm always writing for magazines, about my love of different films and whatnot, or doing extras for Blu-rays. I just have a blast. So, it's what I wanted to do, and it's just in my blood. And I think I had the most creative fun back in the 90s when low budget films were still being budgeted in like the $1.2 million range. That's about, as big as I got. But that was a decent amount of money to actually, do some pretty cool things. And I was able to, not only with Guilty as Charged, but I did 2 films, Oblivion 1 and 2, that were full moon productions for the Paramount were financing, and it was with Julie Newmar, George Takei, Isaac Hayes again, Maxwell Caulfield was in the second one. Carl Stryken, the guy who plays Lurch in the Addams Family movies and the Giant on Twin Peaks, and Meg Foster, who has those incredible ice blue eyes, and again, just dream cast.
In the outlands of space, there's a wild new frontier.
You got a problem, Red Eye?
Yeah, I got a problem.
Where the good guys are only human.
You get out of town, or I'll kill you.
You ain't gonna kill nobody.
And the bad guys are not.
We're gonna show the good people of Oblivion the great advantages to a town run by Red Eye. Ah!
Where the liquor's hard.
Jim, beam me up.
And the women are wild.
Delicious.
And the natives are on the warpath.
Great Scott!
Because in this town, it's not cowboys and Indians.
Not so fast, Pocahontas.
It's cowboys and aliens.
We're getting a posse together.
Who's with me?
My family's spirits cry out to be avenged.
I love the way this guy talks!
Is that a fact?
Definitely!
Oblivion. It's high noon in outer space.
We made those films in Romania, and it was basically a space western.
How was it to film in Romania?
It was fantastic because labor is so cheap. We could actually build things from scratch, and we literally the whole movie kind of takes place in this western town on another planet, but we built that whole western town from the ground up. When I got there, it was a cornfield, and that town is still there in the back lot, what became the back lot of Castell Films. And you can see it, and it pops up all the time. It was the last time I saw it was in the Hatfields and the McCoys miniseries with Kevin Costner, and there they are walking around the set that I helped design and build. I mean, it's just the weirdest thing to see it still being used. And so that was really fun. And then another film that I was able to design. Oh, and by the way, before we leave the Oblivion movies, I got Pino Donaggio to score them, and he did it with a full orchestra in Italy. And Pino Donaggio, for those that don't know, who I met through De Palma back in my De Palma days, he did Carrie, he did Dress to Kill, he did Blowout, he did Body Double, all those great De Palma films. And he also did the way De Palma found him was he had done a film called Don't Look Now that Nicholas Roeg had directed with Julie Christie and Donald Sutherland, and in the early 70s, and was an amazing score. And I was a big fan of Pino from that before De Palma even started using him. And so it was great to be able to, to get Pino to do one of my movies, which was great fun. But what I was going to move on to was Elvira's Haunted Hills.
Well, I want
And
before,
oh yeah, go ahead.
before we
Go ahead.
start there, I've got to pause for a second.
Okay.
I know we said an hour. How much time do you have? Do you have another extra half
Oh, yeah.
hour?
Yeah, I've got time.
Okay, because I am having so much fun. You're wonderful. You really, anyway. Yes, and you know, about the Elvira, you mentioned like 5-6 minutes ago, you mentioned blood, and I immediately went to Elvira.
Yes. Well, it was interesting, the way the Elvira movie came about. This is the story. I was a huge fan of Elvira from her hosting days in the 80s, where she was hosting horror films on TV. And then she did a film called, her first Elvira movie called Elvira, Mistress of the Dark. And it was about 1988 or so. And I loved that film. I thought it was the most hysterical movie. And so right after my first feature, Guilty as Charged, a really dear friend of mine, Terry Sweeney, and his partner, now husband, Lanier Laney, were threw a party in Hollywood that I went to. Now, Terry Sweeney was in the 80s. He was a Saturday Night Live cast member he was the first openly gay cast member, and he's the one who famously always did Nancy Reagan in drag. And his partner, Lanier, had gone to school with me at the University of South Carolina. So I knew them very well and went to Saturday Night Live tapings and stuff like that to hang with them. And so when I moved to LA and they moved to LA to become writers for Mad TV, anyway, Terry was throwing this party and I go there, and over in the corner in a chair is Cassandra Peterson. And I went over to Terry and I'm like, Terry, I didn't know you knew Cassandra. You've got to introduce me. And he said, oh, come with me. So we go over and I'm, fawning like a super fan and telling her how much I love her and I'm not worthy in the whole business. And then Terry said, well, Sam is a director. He just did his first feature called Guilty as Charged. And Cassandra goes, oh, Guilty as Charged? I just saw that and I love that movie. In fact, I loved it so much that I've been wanting to meet you because if I ever do another Elvira movie, I want you to direct it. And I'm like, what? And I'm like, is this what happens at Hollywood parties? You had, what's going on here? So we became friends. She came and did a cameo appearance in a film I did called Acting on Impulse, which was my second feature, that starred Nancy Allen from my De Palma days, Linda Fiorentino, C. Thomas Howell, Isaac Hayes again, Zelda Rubinstein again, just an amazing cast of people. And Cassandra came, I wanted her to play, not Elvira, but a bouncer at a country western bar. And she said, great, I'll do a Dolly Parton thing. And so she borrowed a blonde wig from Daryl Hannah and did this whole, sort of improvised this little scene outside this country western bar where she cards at the door Nancy Allen and C. Thomas Howell and Linda Fiorentino as they're whisked in. And so we had so much fun, and I continued to be social friends with Cassandra. And she did a pilot for a TV series that I went to the taping of, but it never got picked up. And then, but she kept trying to get a film off the ground, and it wasn't happening. So in the late 1990s, she gives me a call, and she said, okay, everybody in town's turned us down to do another Elvira movie. So my husband and I decided we're gonna finance it ourselves. We're going to mortgage our house and we're going to do it ourselves. And I know that I promised you that you could direct it, but my husband feels like we need to interview a bunch of people and be professional and but you're on the list and we do want you to come in and meet with us. So I go there and she hands me the script, Elvira's Haunted Hills. And she said, now this is a spoof of the Vincent Price, Edgar Allan Poe, Roger Corman films of the 60s, like Pit and the Pendulum, House of Usher, Tomb of Ligeia, all of those. And she goes, are you familiar with them? And I'm like, Cassandra, am I familiar with them? Here is Vincent Price's monologue from the climax of Pit and the Pendulum. Do you know where you are by Ptolemy? You are about to enter hell, the netherworld, the infernal region, the abode of the damned. a place of torment, Gehenna, Naraka, the pit, and the pendulum, the razor edge of destiny, thus the condition of man, bound on an island from which he can never or hope to escape, surrounded by the waiting pit of hell, which must destroy him finally. And she looks at me like I have lost my mind, and she goes, "You're hired." And that's how I got it. I memorized that freaking monologue in junior high school. We were given an acting assignment to do a monologue, and they wanted us to do Shakespeare or whatever. Shakespeare, blah. I wanted to do something I liked. And I knew if I said, you know, can I do a monologue from a Vincent Price movie, that was not going to go over at all. So I said, could I do Edgar Allan Poe? And the teacher said, you know, oh yes, that would be fine. And of course, I had, back in those days, before VHS, before anything, I taped the audio of movies from a microphone onto a reel-to-reel tape recording machine right off of the TV speaker.
I used to do it with a cassette machine.
Yeah, well, I predate cassettes. That's how old I am. So I had Pit and the Pendulum on a reel-to-reel, and I went and transcribed that whole friggin' thing. Now, I knew that that speech was written by Richard Matheson, the screenwriter, not Edgar Allan Poe, but I was not about to tell the teacher that. And I went in and I did my monologue, and I got an A. And it just stuck with me, you know, having to transcribe it and memorize it and everything else. And it stuck with me all those decades and came in very handy because it's exactly what got me that job. And I obviously remember it to this very day. And maybe I'll get another job out of it, who knows? But so now she had already gone to Romania, of all places in the world, a place that I had already made 2 films at. And she had looked at the castles and thought, oh, we're going to shoot on location in a castle. And I was like, I'd been to those castles on our days off on Oblivion. And, you know, they were all in the middle of nowhere and up at the top of mountains. And some of them didn't have running water, and some of them didn't have electricity, and some of them weren't furnished. And it just like, you know, no. This is not what you want to do. And if you're spoofing Roger Corman movies, none of them were shot in castles. They were all set bound on a sound stage. And the establishing shots were these great matte paintings or models or whatever. And, you know, if we're going to spoof it, we need to do it in that way. And the beauty of going to Romania is because of the cheap labor. We'll be able to build the most amazing sets. And so I convinced her that that's the direction we needed to go into. And I got our production designer had worked with me on Oblivion, and I started sending him all the films, all the Corman films and stuff, and he was looking at everything. And I said, look, we've got, you know, look at the Pit and the Pendulum. When we do our Pit and the Pendulum, what they did was they built the slab and they built the pendulum and the walls up to a certain height. But then for the wide shots, the rest of it was like a matte painting or whatever to extend out the rest of the set. And the Romanian production designer, Radu Corceva, said, oh, we've got some great old-time matte painters that, you know, did all the great classics back in the day. And, you know, we'll get them to do this. We'll do it the old-fashioned way, and they'll love it. So I'm saying, perfect. So I get over there, and Radu meets me at the airport, and he goes, okay, so I've got good news and bad news. The bad news is that all those matte painters that I was hoping to get have all died. And so we're not going to be able to do that. But just come with me. We get to the studio, and he takes me in. We walk into the set that he has built for the Pit and the Pendulum. And it is, I feel like I walked onto at Pinewood Studios, one of the James Bond lair sets, or, you know, the volcano set in when they're inside the volcano.
You Only Live Twice.
You Only Live Twice or something. It was this massive set, and the ceiling goes up forever, and the pit goes way down here. He has built the entire thing from ceiling to bottomless pit, all practical. And these incredible Hieronymus Bosch murals on the walls, and just everything was unbelievable. And he took me from one set to another, and we go to the interior of the castle with this beautiful, stairway. And I didn't want the banister. I wanted, you know, those terrifying stairways that they always had in these castles. in the Dracula and different movies, you know, and with this incredible staircase and just all these interiors, I cried. It was just like a dream come true, and it was everything was made to order. You know, it was exactly what I wanted for that movie, and we had so much fun making it. Not only was Cassandra in it, but we had Richard O'Brien of Rocky Horror Picture Show fame playing the Vincent Price character. And for people who don't know, I mean, he was Riff Raff in Rocky Horror Picture Show, but he wrote Rocky Horror. He wrote the original play, the libretto, the lyrics, the music, and when the movie was made, he did the screenplay. He is Mr. Rocky Horror, and he knew all of Vincent Price's films and knew exactly what we were spoofing, and it was just incredible.
You won't be able to move. You won't be able to scream. You won't be able to take your eyes off of Elvira's Haunted Hills.
Allow me to present Elvira.
Yeah, nice meeting you too.
Elvira!
Entertainer extraordinaire.
See Elvira stretch herself as an actress in her most challenging role.
I just love butterflies ever so much.
Richard O'Brien in his most horrifying performance since the Rocky Horror Picture Show. Oh, why? Why? Why?
Snap out of it. God, what are you going for, an Oscar?
A film that is so steamy,
Oh, Lord have mercy.
so shocking,
That's another unfortunate Elzebus family trait, catalepsy.
Fear of cats?
you'll scream. Yes, Johann! You'll gasp. You'll die laughing.
Damn, I hate when that happens.
From the masterfully macabre mind of Elvira.
Right, like there's something going on in my mind.
Elvira's Haunted Hills.
The village people say this castle is evil.
Ah, who listens to the village people anymore?
Was that the movie that Terry Ray met you on?
No, well, no. Terry was an extra in the first Elvira movie.
Okay.
And so we didn't actually meet through the Elvira connection. But I'm trying to think when I first met Terry. I guess it was when at Here TV, the gay network, they were starting, Terry had brought them this project called From Here On Out. And they immediately, because I had done Dante's Cove for Pure TV, and they immediately thought of me as the perfect director for that. And so I think that's how that all came about. And then once we started putting together our, you know, mutual friends and people that we knew and everything, it was like, oh my God, we have all these Elvira connections. And so I ended up directing that series for him. And then we did another series called My Sister Is So Gay. And I did the first season of that with Terry. And anyway, Terry's so funny and so great.
I love him.
Love working with him.
Just as
and so yeah, I mean, the Elvira thing was that was probably the most fun I've ever had, the most laughs I've ever had doing a film. And it was a dream, such a dream come true, being able to spoof those great Vincent Price films that I love so much. And I knew, you know, we kind of skipped over it, but I knew Vincent Price, as did Cassandra. I was a super fan, and when I was a teenager, I would go see, when he would be on tour with lecture tours and stuff, I'd go and see him and meet him backstage. And he and I got to know each other. And when I went to England when I was 17 to interview all the Hammer film people for a fanzine that I did, it was called Bizarre, and this was the issue number 3 that I put out in 1974 when I was about 17. I went over there and, you know, looking to interview, you know, Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing and all the Hammer film people. But I also wanted to interview Diana Rigg from the Avengers TV series, who just passed away this year, you know, Game of Thrones. But she, you know, to me, growing up, she was Emma Peel on the Avengers, and a goddess. And
James Bond's wife.
And exactly, James Bond's wife in On Her Majesty's Secret Service.
Yeah.
And Vincent Price's daughter in Theater of Blood. So I very much wanted to interview her about all of this, and particularly Theater of Blood, which was fairly new at that time. And I'd been successful getting other interviews, but I was having a hard time getting her people to pay attention to me. And so she was on the West End starring in Pygmalion on stage and playing Eliza Doolittle. And I'm like, well, I've got to see that anyway. And I'll go there, and maybe afterwards at the stage door, I'll get to meet her, and I could beg for an interview. So I go there, and of course it's sold out. I'm just there, temporarily on vacation, but there's always somebody selling a ticket out front. I managed to buy a ticket. It was like right in the orchestra, fantastic seat. I take my seat, waiting for the play to begin, and I hear this laugh that is very familiar right behind me. I turn around, and it's Vincent Price and his new wife, Coral Brown, who they had just met while shooting Theater of Blood, and Diana Rigg was actually the person who introduced them. Oh. And there they are sitting, and before my mouth drops open, and before I can even utter anything, Vincent says, "Sam, what are you doing here?" And I couldn't believe that he remembered my name. It was still, even though we sort of knew each other, it was still like, a fan. And I just was blown away. And I told him what I was doing and that I wanted to get Diana to be interviewed for my magazine. And he said, "Well, you're coming backstage with us, dear boy." And so after the show, we go back and we drink champagne with Diana Rigg, and he puts her on the spot, and she can't say no to an interview. And she tells me to come back on the day when she's doing a matinee and an evening performance, and she kind of hangs out in between shows. And we did it there, at her, in her dressing room. And it was fantastic, and she was unbelievably nice, and it was great. And then while we're just for 2 seconds, there's so many things to talk about. While on that same trip, I had already interviewed Christopher Lee by mail, sending him a questionnaire, and I printed an interview like that in one of my earlier issues. But I wanted to meet him in person, and so as soon as I knew that I bamboozled my parents into sending me to London as a high school graduation present. As soon as I knew I was going, I wrote to him and everybody else that I could get the address for, and said, "I'm coming." And he wrote back and said, "Well, when you get here, I'll take you to lunch." So I call him up, and he said, "Well, I'm working. You're going to have to come to meet me for lunch at Pinewood Studios." And I said, "No problem." And I get on the train, go out to Pinewood. He didn't really mention what he was doing. I get out there. He's making a little film called Man with the Golden Gun, the James Bond movie, in which he is playing the man with the golden gun. He's the villain in it.
Right.
So he's been released for lunch early. We have lunch. I interview him with my little tape recorder, and then he said, "So, they're not going to need us back for another hour. They're just breaking the rest of the cast and crew for lunch," and they were starting to stream into the commissary. And he said, "Why don't you come with me, and I'll give you a tour of the James Bond sets." So, an hour. He gives me this private tour, and we're walking around, just the two of us, where he's explaining all of the sets. And we're going through, his character was Scaramanga, and we go through Blair, and in this little hallway, there's the walls were all of these glass cabinets, and behind the glass were a collection of butterflies that were tacked up on the walls. And I said to him, "Are these butterflies real?" And he goes, "Sam, this is a James Bond film, not a Hammer film." And Hammer Film, for those who don't know, was the low-budget horror company that made all of his Dracula movies. And he, Christopher Lee, God love him, and I absolutely adore him and would never say anything negative, but he kind of felt like those movies were a little beneath him, and he really wanted to be doing like James Bond movies, and he wanted to work with all the big boys. And to his credit, he did. He was in the Lord of the Rings movies, and he was in Tim Burton movies, and Steven Spielberg's 1941, and Hugo, directed by Martin Scorsese. And, you know, he did some amazingly great, huge movies. But the irony, of course, is that every single director that I just mentioned only cast him because they fell in love with him as Dracula in those little low-budget Hammer films. And so anyway, but he said, just spend the rest of the day. And I watched them, you know, they came back from lunch, and I watched Roger Moore and Britt Eklund and Maud Adams and Christopher Lee and his little sidekick in the movie, Hervé Villechaize.
Oh, yes.
From Fantasy Island, De Plane.
But that wasn't that before Fantasy Island, or
it might?
It's like
it might have been. It might have been. But at any rate, at the end of the day, it was. I mean, I didn't get to see any car crashes or chase scenes or explosions or snogging, unfortunately. But you know, they were shooting a scene around the dinner table. You know, relatively sedate scene. And but at the end of the day, Christopher Lee said, you know, do you want to ride back to London in the studio's, you know, Rolls-Royce limo? And I'm like, yeah. So I get in the back in the little fold-down trundle seat, and I'm facing the back seat. And on the back seat is Christopher Lee, who's about 6'6", and Hervé Villechaize, who is a little person, and was, you know, the two size difference was hilarious in and of itself. And Hervé was already 10 sheets to the wind and started telling us on the ride back, started telling us all the stories about, okay, kids out of the room for a second, telling all the stories about the prostitutes that he had hired since he had been in London, and then going into graphic detail of everything he was doing to them. And Christopher Lee, who normally is a very, you know, relatively serious gentleman, started to laugh, and then he started to howl, and then he just was completely doubled over in hysterics and got me, and, you know, and I was laughing too. And every time he would try to compose himself, I would laugh and get him laughing again. And all Hervé had to do was to say one more nasty word or whatever, and we'd be, you know, guffawing again. And it was just the most hilarious car ride I've ever had. And when we finally dropped Christopher Lee off at his house in Cadogan Square, I just remember pulling away and looking out the back window, and he literally, his hand was on the gate, and he was just still laughing, doubled over, trying to compose himself before he went in to face his wife, and he did not want to have to tell her what was making him laugh so hard. But you know, it was just incredible stuff like that, to be able to meet these people and interview them, and, you know, and then put out my magazine. And so that's why when I finally did The Fury, I knew the importance of getting, you know, having one-on-one interviews, because, and so that's why I got that assignment from Cinefantastique, because then I would be able to have one-on-ones with all the stars of that movie. And it was, you know, it was something that I'd been doing a lot of. So I was very, you know, had a lot of training and experience with it. So, you know, anyway, hugely long side story, but so I did know Vincent Price, and the fact that we were able, and Cassandra had gotten to know him as well, and the fact that we were able to lovingly spoof all those Vincent Price Poe films in Elvira's Haunted Hills. We thought of it like we were, like Mel Brooks was doing a loving spoof of all the Universal Frankenstein movies with Young Frankenstein, and that's what we felt we were doing with our movie, with the Vincent Price films. And we dedicated the film to Vincent. And if he had been alive, we would have insisted that he play the character. And but he had died a few years earlier than that. We actually, before Richard O'Brien, who did play the Vincent Price character in it, we tried to get Christopher Lee. His people said that no, he doesn't do those kinds of roles anymore. So we were very disappointed about that. And then we even approached Mick Jagger, who turned it down. And there were a couple, and Richard Chamberlain, because Cassandra Peterson is a very close friend of Richard Chamberlain, you know, Dr. Kildare, but, you know, he had done all kinds of great films. And but he had other miniseries or something that he was doing and couldn't do it. But it went around that it ended up with the person who really should have done it, and that was Richard O'Brien. I mean, he was a blessing in disguise. It was the perfect person to be in that role.
Wow. I just you like. I feel like you're taking me down a hallway, and then we're gonna go this way and that way. And
I keep remembering things that happen, anyway.
All the stuff that I grew up loving, like the man. I mean, again, I collected all the James Bond albums.
Yeah. Oh my God! And Sean Connery just passed away this past week on Halloween. That was such, that was very sad. But he lived a full life. He was 90. Yeah. But my God, he will always be my James Bond. That's the James Bond that I grew up with, and it was just amazing. But I'm still a huge Bond fan to this day, and can't wait to see No Time to Die if it ever can get released.
What a title for a film for the year that he goes.
No. And
what is it? I mean, just jumping for a second, Sean Connery died this year. Honor Blackman. And the actress who played Gold, the one who was Gold.
Yeah, Shirley Eaton. No. There were two. Not Shirley Eaton. She died a while back. But there was a model who's also painted gold, and appears on the album cover and in different things. But in the movie itself, it was supposed to be Shirley Eaton. But I think this other girl was like a stand-in, or I'm not quite sure how that all worked, but she did a lot of the publicity photos and everything, and that's the one who died recently. I forget her name, right. But and then of course Diana Rigg died just recently.
Yes.
So of all the Bond girls, I think Diana Rigg was probably one of my very top favorites from On Her Majesty's Secret Service, and then I'll go there. One of my other favorite Bond girls is Jane Seymour.
I love her.
And I got to go to lunch with Jane Seymour when I was 17 and interviewed her for this magazine because she played the female creature in Frankenstein: The True Story, which is what's on the cover. And she played the female creature, Prima, in that miniseries. It was a 2-part miniseries in 1973 on NBC, made by Universal, with this amazing all-star cast. James Mason, Leonard Whiting as Dr. Frankenstein. He had been Romeo in Zeffirelli's Romeo and Juliet. David McCallum, Agnes Moorehead, Sir Ralph Richardson, Sir John Gielgud. Just the most amazing cast. And Jane Seymour, who had literally just finished shooting Live and Let Die at
Solitaire.
Solitaire. Very good. She had just shooting, and literally 3 days later started filming this movie at the same studio at Pinewood Studios. And when I saw this film on TV, it played over 2 nights. I was already a huge Frankenstein movie fan anyway, but I fell in love with this movie. And Michael Sarrazin played the creature. And what was unique about this production was that the creature started out beautiful and then slowly started to deteriorate. And that was a whole new way of going about it. Now, I was 17 when I saw it, still a closeted gay teen, trying to figure out my life. And this movie spoke to me. I could tell there was some sort of gay subtext going on in this movie because the creature was so beautiful. Dr. Frankenstein was, this 23-year-old gorgeous actor who played Romeo, Leonard Whiting. And I just felt like their relationship felt very much like the relationship in Pygmalion, between Eliza Doolittle and Henry Higgins, where the doctor was teaching the creature how to be a gentleman and to present him into society. And they go on a date to the opera, and it's like all this stuff. And I'm just like, whoa, was this all intentional? I couldn't tell, but it certainly spoke to me, and it certainly felt like it was intentional. Well, then I started interviewing people from it, and I find out the screenwriters were Christopher Isherwood and Don Bacardi, one of the most famous gay couples ever. Christopher Isherwood wrote the book that Cabaret was based on and wrote A Single Man. And Don Bacardi is a very famous portrait artist. And I find out that the producer of the film is gay, Hans Stromberg Jr., who discovered Vampira, the horror, and wrote and produced her hosting gig in the 50s, the very first horror host thing. So there's a weird connection there. But Hans Stromberg Jr.'s dad was a huge producer at MGM, produced the Thin Man movies, some of my favorite movies of all time, produced The Women, produced Karloff's Mask of Fu Manchu, and produced another film with Karloff and Lucille Ball called Lured. And so this producer had grown up in Hollywood, but had grown up with Boris Karloff as one of his family friends. He knew Elsa Lanchester, who was making a movie for his dad at the very same time she was doing The Bride of Frankenstein, and he had met her. He had all these horror roots and loved horror films, and his favorite movie of all time is Bride of Frankenstein, like mine.
Yeah.
And he became head of CBS programming in the late 50s and early 60s, where he helped champion and develop series like The Munsters, Gilligan's Island, The Wild Wild West, The Twilight Zone, Alfred Hitchcock Presents, and the list goes on and on and on. All these iconic shows that I grew up on. And then he became an independent producer, and what did he want to do? His dream project of all time was to make Frankenstein the true story. And this was his dream project, baby. And he wanted it to be, I didn't tell everybody this, but he wanted it to be very, very, very loaded with gay subtext. And so he had this great gay couple writing it, and he had several other gay comrades in different positions. The editor was John Schlesinger's editor. He was gay. And they called themselves the Lavender Hill Mob because they were trying their best to sneak in as much gay subtext into this network, primetime miniseries.
Yeah.
So years later, in 2017, I was able to write an entire magazine on this film and to interview Jane Seymour again, and everyone else involved who was still around and still alive. And the editor of this the magazine is called Little Shop of Horrors, and it's edited and published by Richard Clemenson. And he knew how much I loved this movie and how much I knew about it and how much I wanted to write about the gay subtext and sort of reclaim or claim for the first time ever, this film as having so much of a queer influence and queer subtext. And so I had the entire issue. We did a 3-panel mural fold-out. Had this incredible painting by Mark Maddox. I got Anne Rice to write the foreword because this was the film that inspired her to write Interview with the Vampire, which launched her entire career as a writer. Yeah. And she absolutely loves this movie. And I won the Rondo Award very proudly for Best Article of the Year. And it's like a miniature book. And it's just all about the making of the film. And there are 120 pages and 400 photographs in this book. Is that obsessive enough for you?
Oh my God. Well,
this, before I leave it, it led to Shout Factory or Scream Factory getting me to do all of the extras for this brand new release this year, 2020, Frankenstein the True Story on Blu-ray. And they did a absolutely beautiful, remastering, 2K, and it looks better than it even looked when it first showed on NBC, because nobody had this kind of, resolution on their TV sets in 1973. And it is incredible. It's 3 hours without, it was over 2 nights and a 4-hour slot, but there was an hour worth of commercials. When you take all the commercials away, it's 3 hours. And I do a 3-hour audio commentary on here. And I interviewed on camera Jane Seymour again for the 3rd time. And I went to London to interview Leonard Whiting, who played Dr. Frankenstein. And then I got Don Bacardi, the co-screenwriter, to also be interviewed for it. And so you gotta check out this movie, people. It's so good, and kind of a lost gem. And not that many people know about it because it kind of showed on TV back then, and it was so long, it wasn't easy to program on, you know, late night slots and stuff like that. So it just hasn't been seen by very many people since it first aired back in 1973. So definitely check this out. And it's, you know, it's
I know what I'm asking Santa for Christmas, or excuse me, for Hanukkah.
Yeah. So with Jane Seymour, having interviewed her at age 17, and then again in 2017 for this magazine, and then again for this, where we went to her house and actually videotaped it. You know, I have to say, she's my favorite Bond girl.
She's so amazing, and you could tell that she just has a real, true, beautiful soul.
Oh, she does. She really does. And she's been so supportive of my trying to, you know, reintroduce Frankenstein, the True Story to fans, and to give it a new lease on life, and to look at it in a different way than people had looked at it or considered it necessarily before. Well, so she's been very, very helpful.
Talking about you as a writer, I actually, before this morning when I was looking through, I actually ordered your new book today on Amazon, Toilet Paper Caper.
Yes. I'm glad you brought that up because, you know, I just happen to have a copy right here. Okay, so when we had this shutdown and I couldn't direct movies, I was getting very itchy to be creative. And I was also having a very hard time finding toilet paper. I think all of us were for a while back in March and April.
Yes.
And I literally went to a grocery store and was like talking to the guy at the front and going, you know, what do you have to do to get toilet paper around here? And I suddenly felt like I was doing a drug deal.
Oh my God.
And I thought, all right, there's some humor to be had with this. And so I decided to write a parody of a children's book in the style of those little golden books we all had as kids. And it's called Sam's Toilet Paper Caper. And it's all about me trying to procure toilet paper during the pandemic. And it's beautifully illustrated by this friend of mine, Dan Gallagher. And there's all sorts of movie references. If you can see right here, the grocery store clerk looks suspiciously like Peter Lorre.
Yes.
And, you know, I have to have a De Palma thing in here. So when I'm feeling very embarrassed at one point, and I just feel like they're all going to laugh at you. So I have a bucket of blood being poured all over me, and Piper Laurie up here, laughing. They're all going to laugh at you. And so it's loaded with film references, from The Sound of Music to The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and everything. And you'll love it. Now, the really good news about this, it's only $10, and all the profits, not a portion of the profits, all the profits go to the World Health Organization's COVID-19 Solidarity Response Fund. And so it's a great Christmas gift. You can buy dozens of these. And I highly recommend the paperback because I feel like every bathroom needs one of these. It's perfect porcelain throne reading material, people. And
I've got mine.
So anyway, Sam's Toilet Paper Caper on Amazon. You can also, aside from the paperback, you can also get it as an ebook if you prefer. And I will mention that today we're taping this interview on November 5th. I have a new book that just got released today on Amazon, paperback. I don't even have a hard copy yet. I haven't even seen it. It's available in paperback and ebook. And this one is a little more adult. I'd say a lot more adult, but also all the proceeds, everything is going to the World Health Organization's COVID-19 Solidarity Response Fund. So it's for a good cause. Now, take the children out of the room. The name of the book is Orbgasm. And it is about it's a science fiction thriller that's very sexy and very erotic, but also has tons of film references and is just kind of kooky and wacky. I say that it is an erotic pulp sci-fi satyricon, and I think film fans will definitely get a big kick out of it. And it's about a woman who is a James Bond girl, starlet, who an orb falls from outer space into her backyard. And the orb is not only miraculously cure all diseases, it also makes people very horny. And she teams up with her best gay friend, this very hunky guy who's an author, who is a mashup author, and his latest book is Frankenstein Meets the Three Musketeers. And they team up and take this orb on the road and are trying to take it to her dad, who has Alzheimer's, because they want to cure him. And the government is after them. They want the dark state want to confiscate this orb, and so they're on the lam trying to hide from the authorities, and it becomes a road picture, kind of like Thelma and Louise, or in this case, Thelma and Louis. And so anyway, it's a fun book, but it's very sexy. It's called Orbgasm, Orbgasm, and it just became available today on Amazon in paperback and ebook.
And I could see after we're out of quarantine, you're going to make it into a film.
Well, it actually, truth be known, it started out as a screenplay many years ago.
Yeah.
And it was in 1995, if you can believe it, 25 years ago, this idea was spawned, and it was going to be made by Showtime. I had made one other science fiction sort of with comic elements called Out There.
Yeah.
And we were going to do this sort of a follow-up. And but then the regime changed to Showtime, and you know what happens then? All the projects in development get thrown out. And so it went into a drawer. Back then, one of the diseases that was very important for this orb to cure was AIDS. Mm-hmm. And shortly after that, the drugs for AIDS got better, and it was no longer the boogeyman quite as much, as it became a more manageable disease. And so it just kind of knocked the wind out of the story for me a bit, and I just kind of kept it in a drawer. Well, now with COVID-19, everybody's got cures on the brain again, and now it's suddenly relevant again. And so I updated it and made the diseases that this orb was curing would be, things that are threats nowadays. And so it does feel like it's relevant again. So anyway, that's what got me all excited about, wanting to use my time of not working, turn this into a novel. And again, for cause for the COVID-19 fund with the World Health Organization.
Right. Thank you for staying longer with us, and this has just been a joy. I mean,
I love it.
I have to say, I've been, of course, looking at that gorgeous room behind you and all your creations back there.
What? It's very minimalist, and we call it. It's kind of our, curio shop on acid. That's how we describe our decorating in our place. My husband, his name is Gary Bowers. He's a hairdresser, and we've been together for 38 years, collecting odds and ends of just anything that is bizarre and crazy, and that's what we have all over our place. And you'll find out when you read Sam's Toilet Paper Caper that I have a bathroom that is a Tarzan bathroom, from floor to ceiling, decorated in Tarzan memorabilia, from posters to figures to you name it. And it is featured in here. Here I am sitting on the toilet in my Tarzan bathroom.
Oh my God.
There you go.
That's great.
So anyway, yeah, we have fun with it.